And we are back. Thank you so much for waiting. We are now going to talk to Boyd Cohen. He's the CEO of Iomob, and he's going to talk about the integration of different types of mobility. Thank you so much for joining us, Boyd. Can you hear me?
I can. I wish I was with you in Berlin, but I'll have to do it remote from Barcelona today.
All right. Well, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Love the punctuality. I'm ready to go.
You can get started anytime.
So I heard Shell's presentation just a little while ago. Obviously, very ambitious agenda around the low carbon future. And I think in mobility and multimodality, we've been talking a lot about how do we get to, how can multimodality accelerate the path to zero carbon? We did at Iomob a bunch of research with some of our impact investors and other experts in the sustainability and carbon space to try to get under the hood and say, you know, we all in the multimodality space talk about low carbon and sustainability, but we haven't really quantified very clearly what the carbon reduction potential is. So we embrace this concept called total avoidable emissions to say if the whole world, from the supply side of mobility services to the users of mobility services, embraced multimodality, what kinds of reductions could we obtain at a global scale? Some of you may have read Bill Gates' recent book about averting the climate crisis or disaster. And in there he talks about really nothing is worth doing given the rate at which we need to change if it can't result in at least 1 billion tons of reduction. So out of the 51 billion, roughly, that we create annually as a global society. And what you can see is our analysis resulted in over 1 billion tons of reduction if the whole world embraced multimodality. And we basically broke it down into 4 categories, with the first 2 focused on modal shift towards rail. So there's shifting from short haul flights, which for those of you in Germany, you're probably well aware that there's, you know, a very ambitious effort underway with Deutsche Bahn and other actors in the aviation space to shift more short haul flights to rail, as well as in France, they banned short haul flights. So this is coming to a country near you, that we will increasingly see rail as an alternative to short haul. And if you need a long haul flight, and it normally would have been connected by a short haul flight, it will in the future be connected by rail. And as you can see, that can have a significant contribution to our reduction in emissions. To make all of these models work, whether it's shift from flights to rail, long distance car to rail, private car to shared mobility services, and shift towards electric mobility, those 4 areas, they benefit by the capability to support multimodal journeys. Because the minute you get out of your car and choose an alternative, it's almost certain you're going to need more than one mode to go from door to door. And as all of us know who live in Europe, for example, anyway, it's increasingly common that even if you're in your car, you're not going to go door to door, because increasingly we're adding road user charging, congestion zones, and eliminating or removing parking spaces from urban areas, reducing the flow of private vehicles in urban areas. So increasingly you'll see more combined park and ride type of options. Waiting for the next slide. Which is, well, there we go. Last year, we hosted a session on avoiding Carmageddon, which is, you know, in the middle of COVID, there was so much concern that we would actually see more people go to their existing cars or buy cars because of the fear of being in public transit. And of course, we saw massive reductions in use of mass and public transit in many markets as low as 90%. We saw in the UK, the Prime Minister asking the citizenry to avoid public transit and rail which of course to many of us was a painful thing to have to hear, although there was an argument for that. So one thing I think is really interesting, 10 years ago, there was a very big discussion around how software was eating the world and how increasingly things like Netflix ate Blockbuster. And we were seeing all these kinds of business models, Amazon eating retail. All those things continue, of course, and have accelerated over time. We haven't heard enough people talk about how much software has been eating mobility over time, and it's been pretty substantial. You know, I think I call this a pyramid because they kind of built off each other. In my opinion, the first thing software ate in mobility was maps. How many of you in the last 5 years have actually bought a physical map when you arrive to a city to actually figure out how to move around the city? Right. Well, then what came after that, when you had more ubiquity of smartphones, was embedded maps in phones, enabling app-based, location-based services. Amongst the first were, of course, taxis and Uber type solutions. Uber, Lyft, Careem, and all the rest around the globe leveraged this sort of digitization to disrupt traditional industries. Then, of course, we continue through digital payments so that you can actually transact on your smartphone or other digital devices. We've now, of course, moved into the case environment with connected, autonomous, shared electric vehicles. All of those things very much benefiting from digitization. And then we have, more recently over the last 5 years, really over the last 3 years, an explosion in new forms of shared mobility fleets, especially when you think about micromobility and how they've arrived to our cities. And, it's funny, like 3 years ago, micromobility wasn't even really a term anyone discussed. While it's hard to believe now, things like Bird and Lime and Tier and Void didn't even exist 3 years ago, and now they're ubiquitous in hundreds of cities around the world, all powered by digitization. But, the topic for today is, okay, where are we going with multimodality? And why is there a need for us to think about it is because of all these converging trends, the growing interest in moving away from car dependence, the emergence of all these shared mobility services, thousands and thousands of shared mobility services around the globe, of which each one has their own app. And it's very hard to navigate that fragmented system for people to, in the city they live in, and worse, the city they travel to, figure out how to properly go from A to B in their car or combining their car with other services or not having a car. I know we're going to talk about love of your car or not in the panel. I'm 50, I'm American, and not only do I not own a car, I haven't had a driver's license for 6 years. I know for a lot of people, including in Germany, that seems crazy. And of course, for my colleagues back in the States, they also think it's crazy. But I live in Barcelona, and I take advantage of all of the mobility ecosystem everywhere I travel. As you can imagine, one of the main reasons we came up with Iomob as a company was to tackle this very issue of the fragmented mobility marketplace. How can we accelerate the shift away from depending on your car? You have all these software eating mobility around our ecosystem, great. But if it's all fragmented software pieces of information that's disconnected, you're really not going to tackle Carmageddon. How do you get people to leave a car at home if they have one, if they have to open 50 apps to figure out how to get to and from the best way? So that's where multimodality comes in. And Iomob, which stands for the Internet of Mobility, is a interoperable open platform that connects public and private shared mobility services and makes them accessible through our enterprise customers. So we don't go straight to end users. There isn't an Iomob branded app in the App Store. There are Iomob powered apps operated by our large transport, travel, and other types of customers. So here you have 3 different videos. One on the left is our Brightline Trains, which is the first private rail operator in 100 years in the US. This is going to shock a lot of you who've never been on a Brightline train and understand trends around rail and mobility and public transit. US is, historically underinvested in rail and public transit infrastructure. Brightline is disrupting everything because they are creating a world-class high-speed passenger rail system with the stated goal of connecting city pairs that are too far to drive and too short to fly. So their first major pair is Miami to Orlando. And for any of you flown into Miami, for example, to go to Disney World, you will have experienced the pain it is to actually go and rent a car and drive up to Orlando and then leave your car parked for a week while you're at Disney World. So it's a very useful service. And they are relaunching post-COVID with a vision, an ambitious vision, around enabling true door-to-door mobility, of which you can see a little bit of what that experience is going to end up being like for users. You will enter, this launches in 2 months, in November. The user will enter their origin address, or say, yeah, where I am right now is where my origin is. Their destination address, receive door-to-door options, and be able to discover, route, book, and pay for those options inside the Brightline app. For a company that is pushing the envelope on a new mode of mobility for the US market, this is extremely transformational because they're trying to get people out of their car. And that great user experience we have, if we have a car and we can drive door to door, you have to compete with that if you're a rail operator. So that's Brightline's ambition. And they are going to have very high-end luxury electric vehicles, private shuttles to connect to the rail station, plus Iomob's platform integrates micromobility, public transit, and other services. So a passenger or prospective passenger can see all their options, including in a door-to-door journey, saying, well, if you have your own car, another option is to drive your car to the station, park it there. You can reserve and pay for your parking in advance. And then we can resolve your last mile when you get to the destination station. I want to come back to something I said earlier because it might not be that obvious. We're used to using Google Maps and we're used to saying our origin address and destination address. When is the last time you entered an online travel agency like Kayak or TripAdvisor or Skyscanner or a rail app or an airline app and said, here's my origin address and destination address? We don't do that. We look up airport codes and city names or rail station names and say, we're going from this rail station to that one. Why? Because to date, the legacy apps in the market and web platforms don't support door-to-door, and they make the user figure out what their stations are, and then the user has to figure out how to get to and from them. Well, what is the next iteration of door-to-door, in our opinion, of multimodality, is allowing rail operators, airlines, transit agencies, and anyone else who wants to offer their user or their employee a seamless, competitive experience to going door-to-door in a car, is enabling this full marketplace, public, private, shared, including factoring in your own private car if you have one, or scooter, in true door-to-door journeys. So what you're seeing, that was on the left. Brightline in the middle is a mock-up we did for KLM. They're not a current client yet anyway. And on the right, you're seeing some really interesting work our product and algorithms teams are doing to make that first and last mile, if it's going to be micromobility, super powerful and accessible. And for all of you in this audience who's ever used a shared mobility service or works in the micromobility space or has engaged with it in a multimodal setting, know that micromobility is really tricky for a lot of reasons for multimodality. It's tricky because you have geofencing rules. You have where you can park dockless scooters. You have bikes that are docked, and you might try to send a user on a first mile of their journey with a bike share and not know, and the user not know if when they get there, they can even park their bike there because there might not be any available docked station. We are trying to solve all that and even more, because another challenge you have with first and last mile with micromobility is these vehicles move around all the time. And if I, as a user, am about to take a 45-minute door-to-door journey and the journey planner is proposing my last mile to be a scooter, I won't know if a scooter is available till I'm at least 10 or 15 minutes away, because that's the soonest micromobility operators will normally allow a reservation in advance. So we're solving that problem too, so that we can project how many micromobility devices are available at the destination train station before we send someone there, and then we can automate the reservation of that scooter or bike once they're within the reservation period of whichever services happen to be available in that destination at that time. So these are the complexities around delivering true multimodal, but it requires this level of dedication to the user experience if we want to avoid Carmageddon and help people make more sustainable choices. And that will really only happen when those sustainable multimodal choices are as easy, as attractive as taking your own private car.
Well, you're absolutely right about the kinks. I mean, I never really thought about it. You just kind of take it as a given that you have to go into a different app and enter this here and then enter this there. Even coming here yesterday, I had to take 2 different modes of transport because the trains are on strike here and I didn't know.